The summer when I was 73, the heat came like a beast with claws. I remember sitting in my kitchen at 6 in the morning, my cotton nightgown already clinging to my back with dampness, feeling the air thick as molasses and heavy with the smell of hot asphalt seeping through the screen door. The weather lady on my little TV was shaking her head, her voice tight with worry, as she warned everyone to stay indoors, while outside my window the concrete was already shimmering like water. The metallic taste of fear filled my mouth as I realized this wasn't going to be an ordinary heat wave. This was the kind that kills people like me, the old, the forgotten, the ones whose children think we're just being dramatic when we say we can't breathe. I had raised my son Marcus to be strong, to be successful, to never need anyone. Maybe that was my first mistake. For 38 years, I had stood behind him through every failure, every dream, every broken heart. When he couldn't afford college, I sold my mother's china set. When his first business failed, I took out a second mortgage on this little house. When his wife left him, I watched his kids every weekend for 2 years while he put his life back together. Now he lived in a mansion 40 minutes away, drove a car worth more than I'd ever seen, and had central air conditioning that could freeze a lake. But when the heat started climbing past 105 degrees, and my old window unit finally gave up with a sad little wheeze, Marcus was too busy to help his mother who had given him everything. If you've ever felt invisible to the people you love most, please subscribe and hit that bell, because sometimes the stories that hurt the deepest are the ones that need to be told. I called Marcus on Tuesday morning when the thermometer on my porch read 108 degrees. My fingers already slick with perspiration as I gripped the phone. My voice was already hoarse from the dry air that seemed to scrape against my throat with every breath, and I could feel sweat beading on my forehead like tiny pearls of desperation, even though I was sitting perfectly still. The smell of my own fear mixed with the acrid scent of overheated plastic from the broken air conditioner filled my nostrils. "Marcus, honey, my air conditioning died," I said, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice while the receiver grew slippery in my palm. "The repairman can't come until Friday, and the news is saying this heat could be dangerous for—" He cut me off before I could finish, that familiar edge of impatience creeping into his voice, like the sharp taste of copper pennies on my tongue, the same tone he'd used when I needed him throughout the years. "Mom, you're being dramatic again," he said, and I could hear the sound of his office chair creaking, the distant hum of his perfectly climate-controlled building. "Open some windows, drink some water. I've got 3 meetings today, and a conference call with investors from Tokyo." The way he said dramatic felt like a slap, the same tone he'd used when I worried about him driving in snow, when I asked him to call when he got home safe, when I suggested maybe he was working too hard, as if caring about survival was just another one of my silly old lady worries. I sat there holding the phone long after he hung up, listening to the dial tone mix with the sound of my neighbor's sprinklers hitting the fence between our yards. The house felt like an oven already, and it wasn't even 10 o'clock. I tried opening the windows like he suggested, but the air outside was hotter than the air inside, and all I managed to do was let in the smell of melting asphalt and dying grass. The silence in my kitchen felt heavier than the heat, weighted down by 38 years of putting him first and never asking for anything in return. I spent the next hour moving from room to room, looking for the coolest spot in the house like some kind of refugee in my own home. The bathroom tiles felt good under my bare feet for about 10 minutes. The basement was better, but the stairs made my knees ache, and I knew I couldn't live down there like some kind of mole. My bedroom faced east and caught the morning sun like a trap. By noon, it would be unbearable. I settled in the living room with a glass of ice water, but even the ice cubes were melting faster than I could drink them. By afternoon, the heat had turned vicious. My skin felt tight and dry, and every breath seemed to take more effort than the last. I called Marcus again, and this time I didn't try to hide how scared I was. "Marcus, please, I need help. The house is like a furnace, and I don't know what to do." But his secretary answered this time, her voice professionally sweet and utterly cold. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Henderson, but Mr. Henderson is in meetings all afternoon. I can take a message." I wanted to scream that I wasn't just any Mrs. Henderson. I was the woman who had given him life, who had sacrificed everything so he could become Mr. Henderson with secretaries and meetings and central air conditioning. But I just said, "Tell him his mother called," and hung up, knowing that message would disappear into the same void where all my other calls for help seemed to go. The afternoon sun was beating against my living room window like it had a personal grudge against me, and I realized with a cold certainty that cut through all that heat, I was going to have to save myself because the son I had raised to be strong had become too strong to remember where he came from. Wednesday morning brought no relief, just more heat pressing down like the lid of a coffin. I woke up at 4:30, my nightgown stuck to my skin with sweat, and knew I had maybe 6 hours before the house became completely unlivable. The local news was calling it a life-threatening heat emergency, and they kept showing footage of ambulances picking up elderly people who had collapsed in their homes. I stared at that footage and wondered if anyone would find me in time, or if Marcus would show up 3 days later wondering why I hadn't returned his calls. I tried to shower, but the water coming out of the pipes was nearly warm, even on the coldest setting, hitting my skin like a lukewarm accusation. Standing under that pathetic spray, I caught sight of myself in the bathroom mirror, really looked at myself for the first time in months. Steam clouded the glass, but not enough to hide the truth. My face was thinner than I remembered, more fragile, the skin around my neck loose and papery to the touch. The mirror felt cool against my fingertips as I wiped away the condensation, revealing deep lines around my eyes that spoke of 7 decades of worry and sacrifice. When had I become this small, brittle woman whose reflection looked like tissue paper left too long in the sun? When had I started looking like someone who could simply disappear and not be missed until the smell became noticeable? The power company had issued warnings about rolling blackouts, and I knew my neighborhood would be first to lose electricity. We always were. The houses around here were old, filled with people like me who had raised their children and been forgotten, left behind in a world that moved too fast and cared too little. Mrs. Chen next door was away visiting her daughter in Portland. The Johnsons across the street had died last winter within 3 weeks of each other, and their house still sat empty with a for sale sign that nobody seemed to notice anymore. I called my grandson Tyler, Marcus's oldest boy, and got his voicemail. "Hey, it's Grandma. I know you're probably busy with summer classes, but could you maybe call me back when you get a chance?" My voice sounded smaller than I intended, like I was already apologizing for existing. Tyler was 22, studying engineering, full of the same ambitious fire his father had once had. Part of me hoped he might still remember the grandmother who used to make him chocolate chip cookies and let him stay up late watching old movies. But the other part of me knew better. By noon, I was rationing the ice in my freezer like it was gold, each cube a small mercy against my burning skin. As I held them against my wrists and neck, the cold bit into my flesh, with a sharp relief that made me gasp, watching the water drip down my arms and pool on the hardwood floor in dark circles that evaporated almost instantly. The smell of my own desperation hung in the air, that sour, anxious scent that comes when fear mixes with sweat and there's nowhere left to hide from yourself. I had moved my pillow and a thin sheet into the hallway near the front door, the fabric as already damp and warm against my cheek, thinking maybe I could catch any hint of breeze that managed to sneak under the doorframe. The hardwood floor felt like a griddle against my skin, but it was still cooler than the furniture, so I lay there like a dog seeking shade, feeling the grain of the wood pressing patterns into my hip bones, while I stared at the ceiling and listened to the air conditioner units humming in all the houses around me, except mine. That's when I heard Marcus's car pull into the driveway, that expensive purr of German engineering that I recognized from Christmas visits and birthday dinners. Hope fluttered in my chest like a trapped bird as I struggled to get up from the floor, smoothing my hair and trying to look less desperate than I felt. But when I opened the door, he wasn't looking at me with concern or love. He was looking at me like I was a problem he needed to solve quickly, so he could get back to his real life. "Jesus, Mom, you look terrible," Marcus said, stepping into my furnace of a house for exactly 30 seconds before stepping back onto the porch, his face twisted with distaste. The smell hit him immediately, that stale, desperate odor of a house where someone was slowly dying, mixed with the sickly sweet scent of wilting flowers from my kitchen table, and the metallic tang of overheated pipes. He was wearing a crisp white shirt that probably cost more than my electric bill, and I could smell his cologne cutting through the oppressive heat like a slap, something expensive and clean that spoke of central air conditioning and shower stalls that actually had cold water. The fabric of his shirt was so pristine it seemed to mock the damp patches spreading across my house dress, while his hair was perfectly styled with some product that smelled like mint and money. I became suddenly, painfully aware of how I must smell after sleeping on the hallway floor, like fear and sweat and the particular sourness that comes when you can't quite get clean, no matter how hard you try. "I brought you a fan," he said, and I looked past him to see a small desk fan in the back seat of his car, the kind you might buy at a gas station for $15. After I had sold my mother's wedding ring to help him buy his first house, after I had worked double shifts at the diner to pay for his college textbooks, after I had given him everything I had and then some, he brought me a desk fan to fight off heat that was literally killing people. The insult of it hit me harder than the temperature, but I smiled and thanked him because that's what I had always done. "You just need to tough it out for a few more days," he said, already backing toward his car like my suffering might be contagious. "The repair guy will be here Friday, right? And it's not that bad. You just have to stay hydrated and keep cool." He said this while standing in the shade, wearing clothes that cost more than most people's monthly salary, getting ready to drive back to his mansion with its 3 separate air conditioning zones and a pool that could cool a small village. The casual cruelty of it took my breath away, more than the heat ever could. I wanted to grab him by his expensive shirt and tell him about the nights I had gone without dinner so he could have new school clothes, about the jobs I had worked until my hands bled so he could play Little League, about the dreams I had buried so his could flourish. I wanted to remind him that I was the one who held him when he cried after his first heartbreak, who taught him to drive in this very driveway, who believed in him when nobody else would. But instead I just stood there in my doorway, watching my only child treat me like a burden he couldn't wait to escape. "Call me if it's a real emergency," he said, which we both knew was his way of telling me not to call at all. A real emergency, in Marcus's world, apparently didn't include his 73-year-old mother slowly cooking to death in a house with no air conditioning. A real emergency would have to be something that couldn't wait, something that would make him look bad if he ignored it, something that would require an actual effort on his part. As I watched his car disappear down the street, I realized that I had raised a stranger who happened to share my DNA. The little desk fan barely moved the air, just pushed the hot breath around my living room like a tired old man sighing. But it wasn't the fan that broke my heart. It was the look in his eyes when he handed it to me, like he was doing me some huge favor, like this pathetic gesture somehow balanced out 38 years of sacrifice and unconditional love. That night, as the useless fan stirred nothing but more heat into my face, a single thought took root. Marcus would never see my worth, unless I forced him to, and I already knew exactly how I was going to do it. That evening, as the temperature inside my house climbed past 100 degrees, I decided I was done waiting for rescue from a son who would never come. Thursday morning arrived like a punishment from God himself. The local news reported that the heat had claimed 6 lives overnight, all elderly people who had died alone in their homes, while their families slept soundly in air-conditioned comfort miles away. I listened to those names being read like a grocery list and wondered if mine would be next, if Marcus would feel even a flicker of guilt when they found me collapsed in my hallway, or if he would just be annoyed that I had to take time off work to arrange my funeral. The rolling blackout started at noon, and when my electricity died with a final mechanical wheeze, I knew I was in serious trouble. The refrigerator stopped humming. The little desk fan Marcus had brought fell silent, and the oppressive heat seemed to press in from all sides, like it had been waiting for this moment. Without the electricity, I couldn't even run cold water, the pump that brought water up from the well-needed power. And suddenly I was more alone than I had ever been in my life. I tried calling Marcus from my landline, but it went straight to voicemail, probably because he was in another important meeting with important people making important money. "Marcus, the power's out and I don't have any water," I said to his voicemail, trying to keep my voice steady even though my hands were shaking. "I'm scared, honey. I need help." But even as I said the words, I knew they would disappear into the same black hole where all my other pleas for help had gone, lost somewhere between his secretary's notepad and his conscience. I spent the afternoon in a kind of delirium, moving through my house like a ghost haunting her own life, my bare feet sticking slightly to the linoleum kitchen floor with each step. The heat was making me dizzy, and I found myself touching the walls for support, leaving damp handprints on wallpaper that had been here since Marcus was in high school, the same pattern I'd chosen when I thought we'd be a family, forever. My fingertips could feel the texture of each faded rose, the slight dampness where condensation had formed against the cooler interior walls. This house held 43 years of memories trapped in its walls like perfume in old fabric, the ghost of birthday candles and Christmas cookies, the lingering echo of his first steps and graduation parties and Christmas mornings, filled with laughter and torn wrapping paper. Now the air tasted bitter, metallic, like sucking on old pennies, and it felt like a mausoleum where love had come to die quietly and without witness. By evening, I was seriously considering walking to the emergency room 5 miles away, even though I knew the heat would probably kill me before I made it 6 blocks. And then it hit me, the basement, not for the slight coolness it offered, but because something was down there, something I hadn't thought about in decades, something that, if I was right, could turn this entire nightmare into my greatest moment of power. Climbing down those basement stairs felt like descending into my own past, and as I pulled the string to turn on the single bare bulb, I found myself face to face with 38 years of motherhood, packed away in cardboard boxes. But there, in the corner behind his old baseball equipment, was something I had completely forgotten about, something that would change everything, and finally give me the power to teach my successful, important, air-conditioned son a lesson he would never forget. The box was smaller than I remembered, tucked behind Marcus's old baseball glove that still held the faint scent of neat's foot oil and childhood dreams. My hands were trembling as I pulled it toward me, the cardboard soft and slightly fuzzy under my fingertips, from decades of basement humidity, not from the heat anymore, but from a memory that was suddenly crystal clear after being buried for 25 years. The musty smell of old paper and forgotten time rose up as I lifted the lid, mixed with something that might have been my father's Old Spice cologne still clinging to the cards after all these years. Inside that box was my father's baseball card collection, cards he had started gathering as a boy during the Great Depression, cards he had protected through World War II with the careful devotion of someone who understood that small treasures could disappear in the blink of an eye. Cards he had passed down to me with hands that smelled like Bengay and pipe tobacco, promising that someday they might be worth something. I had completely forgotten about them after Marcus left for college, forgotten they existed during all those years of struggling to pay bills and keep the house together. Now, as I carefully lifted the first sleeve of cards, I could almost hear my father's voice telling me about each player, each season, each moment of history captured on those pieces of cardboard. He had died when Marcus was 12, and in all the chaos of grief and single motherhood, I had simply packed these away and never looked back. But now, holding them in the sweltering basement heat, I felt like he was with me again. The first card I recognized was a 1952 Mickey Mantle rookie card, the edges still sharp despite being nearly 70 years old. My father had bought it new for 50 cents, told me it would be worth something someday because Mickey Mantle was special, different from all the rest. I had no idea what it might be worth now, but something in my chest told me it was more than the $15 desk fan my son had brought to save my life. These cards had been my inheritance, my father's legacy, and I had nearly let them disappear into the basement of my memory. I carried that box upstairs like I was carrying treasure, which, in a way, I was. But this wasn't about money. This was about power. About finally having something that mattered, something that could make Marcus pay attention to me, for reasons other than guilt or obligation. As I sat on my living room floor with the cards spread around me like a tarot reading of my family's history, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Control over my own destiny. The landline still worked, thank God, and I had kept the business card from that antique appraiser who had come to the neighborhood last spring, going door to door looking for hidden treasures in old houses. He had given me his card with a smile and told me to call if I ever found anything interesting. At the time, I had thought I had nothing worth appraising, except a lifetime of memories and a house full of second-hand furniture. Now, as I dialed his number with shaking fingers, I realized I might have been sitting on a small fortune all these years. "Mr. Patterson, this is Eleanor Henderson on Maple Street. You gave me your card last spring." My voice was stronger now, steadier, like those cards had given me back a piece of myself I didn't know I had lost. As I described what I had found, I could hear the excitement creeping into his voice, the professional interest that told me these weren't just sentimental pieces of cardboard anymore. They were my ticket to finally getting my son's attention in a language he understood: money. Mr. Patterson arrived at my house within 2 hours. Despite the heat emergency and the rolling blackouts that were turning the whole city upside down, he was a thin man in his 60s with careful hands and thick glasses, the kind of person who understood the difference between junk and treasure, between what people threw away and what they should have protected. As he sat at my kitchen table examining each card with a magnifying glass and a small flashlight, I watched his expressions change from professional interest to barely contained excitement. "Mrs. Henderson," he said, his voice deliberately calm in the way people talk when they're trying not to scare away a big fish. "Do you have any idea what you have here?" He held up the Mickey Mantle card like it was made of spun glass, tilting it toward his flashlight to examine the corners and edges. "This is a 1952 Topps Mickey Mantle rookie card, in near mint condition. I've seen cards like this sell for anywhere from $200,000 to $500,000, depending on the exact condition and the buyer. The numbers hit me like a physical blow, and I had to sit down in my kitchen chair to catch my breath. $500,000. That was more money than I had seen in my entire lifetime, more than I had ever imagined owning, more than Marcus probably had in his checking account. Despite all his success and his mansion and his expensive cars, I thought about all the years I had struggled to pay the electric bill, all the times I had counted pennies at the grocery store, all the nights I had lain awake worrying about money while sitting on a fortune I didn't even know I had. "And this isn't the only valuable card here," Mr. Patterson continued, moving through the collection with the reverence of a priest handling holy relics. "You've got a 1951 Bowman Willie Mays, a 1954 Topps Hank Aaron rookie card, several Ted Williams cards from the 40s. Mrs. Henderson, your father assembled one of the finest private collections I've ever seen. The total value could easily be in the 7-figure range. 7 figures. That meant millions. Plural. I was sitting in my overheated kitchen, wearing a nightgown that had seen better decades, and this gentle man was telling me I was a millionaire. But money wasn't the real treasure here. It was the fact that I'd just found the perfect way to turn the tables on Marcus, and he wouldn't even see it coming. But it wasn't the money that made my heart race. It was the power that came with it. For the first time in 38 years of motherhood, I had something my son wanted. Something that would make him see me as more than just an obligation or a burden to be managed from a distance. Marcus, who had built his whole identity around being successful and wealthy and important, was about to discover that his mother, the woman he had left to die in a heat wave with a $15 desk fan, was worth more than his house, his cars, and his precious reputation combined. I asked Mr. Patterson to keep this information confidential for now, and he understood with the discretion of a man who had spent his career dealing with family dynamics and sudden wealth. As he carefully repacked the cards and gave me his contact information, I could feel something shifting inside me like tectonic plates moving beneath the Earth's surface. The heat was still unbearable. The power was still out, and I was still alone in this house. But I wasn't helpless anymore, and I wasn't invisible. I was a woman with options, and my son was about to learn the difference. I waited until Friday evening to make the call, timing it perfectly, for when Marcus would be driving home from his office in his air-conditioned luxury car, probably thinking about his weekend plans and congratulating himself on another successful week of being important. The repairman had come and gone. My air conditioning was working again, filling the house with blessed cool air that felt like forgiveness against my skin. But that wasn't why I was calling. I had spent 3 days learning what it felt like to be abandoned, and now I wanted my son to learn what it felt like to realize he had made the biggest mistake of his life. "Marcus," I said when he answered, my voice calm and steady in a way that seemed to surprise him. "I need to see you tomorrow morning. There's something we need to discuss." He started to give me his usual excuses about busy schedules and important meetings, but I cut him off with a firmness that I hadn't used since he was a teenager. "This isn't a request, Marcus. This is your mother telling you to be here at 10 o'clock sharp and bring Sarah and the kids. They should hear this too." There was something in my tone that must have gotten through to him, because for the first time in years, he didn't argue with me. "Is everything okay, Mom? Are you sick?" The concern in his voice might have been touching if it hadn't taken a crisis to bring it out. "I'm fine now," I told him, which was true in more ways than he could possibly understand. "But we have things to discuss about your father's estate, about things that have been waiting too long to be settled." That got his attention. Marcus had always assumed he knew everything about the family finances, had always believed that when I died there would be nothing but an old house and a small life insurance policy. What he didn't know was that tomorrow he'd walk into my kitchen thinking he was in control and walk out realizing he never was. Saturday morning arrived cool and clear, the heat wave finally broken by a line of thunderstorms that had rolled through during the night, like nature's own air conditioning system. I dressed carefully for this meeting, not in the old house dress and slippers that Marcus usually saw me in, but in the navy blue dress I had worn to his father's funeral, the one that still made me feel dignified and strong. I set the kitchen table with my good china, the set I had been saving for special occasions that never seemed to come, and arranged my father's baseball cards in neat stacks, like I was preparing for the most important business meeting of my life. When Marcus arrived with his family, I could see the confusion in their faces. Sarah looked around the house like she was seeing it for the first time, taking in the antique furniture and family photos with new eyes. The kids, Tyler and Emma, now adults themselves, seemed nervous and uncertain, probably expecting me to announce some terrible diagnosis or make demands about end-of-life care. None of them had any idea that they were about to witness the most important conversation of our family's history. "Thank you all for coming," I said, gesturing for them to sit around the kitchen table where Marcus had done his homework 30 years ago, where we had eaten thousands of meals together, where I had listened to his dreams and fears and hopes for the future. "I have something to show you that's going to change how we understand this family and how we understand what we owe each other." As I reached for the first stack of cards, I saw Marcus roll his eyes slightly, probably thinking his crazy old mother was about to show them some sentimental nonsense that would waste his valuable time. He had no idea that I was about to show him exactly how much his time and his respect was really worth. I placed the 1952 Mickey Mantle rookie card on the table like I was playing the winning hand in a poker game that had been going on for 38 years. The morning light from the kitchen window caught the card just right, making the colors seem to glow against the white tablecloth. "Your grandfather collected these," I said, watching their faces as I spoke. "He started when he was 8 years old, during the Depression, and he added to this collection for over 50 years. He left them to me when he died, and I've been keeping them safe ever since." Marcus leaned forward to look at the card, his businessman's instincts telling him that something important was happening, even if he didn't understand what yet. "Mom, this is nice and all, but why are we looking at old baseball cards?" Sarah was taking pictures with her phone, probably thinking she was documenting some sweet family moment for her social media, while Tyler and Emma seemed genuinely interested in seeing a piece of family history they had never known existed. None of them had any idea they were looking at more money than most people earn in a lifetime. "This particular card," I said, tapping it gently with my finger, "was appraised yesterday at $450,000. In perfect condition, it would be worth more, but even with the slight wear on the corners, it's worth nearly $500,000. The silence that followed my words was so complete that I could hear the new air conditioning unit humming in the background, filling the space where their shock should have been with sound. Marcus's face went through several expressions: confusion, disbelief, and then a calculating look that I recognized from his business dealings. "That's impossible," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Baseball cards aren't worth that kind of money. You must have misunderstood the appraiser." But even as he spoke, he was pulling out his phone, probably Googling 1952 Mickey Mantle rookie card value, and discovering that his mother wasn't the confused old woman he thought she was. Sarah's mouth was hanging open slightly, and I could see her mentally calculating what this might mean for their family's finances. The kids were looking back and forth between the card and their grandmother, like they were seeing me for the first time. "There are 47 more cards in this collection," I continued, laying out a few more examples on the table. The Willie Mays, the Hank Aaron, a 1948 Leaf Babe Ruth that the appraiser had nearly fainted over. According to Mr. Patterson, who's been appraising sports memorabilia for 30 years, the total collection is worth between $1 and $2 million, possibly more, depending on the market and the buyer. I let that information sink in, watching my son's face change as he realized that his mother, the woman he had abandoned during a deadly heatwave with the $15 desk fan, was sitting on a fortune that dwarfed his own success. But the numbers weren't what mattered most to me. What mattered was seeing Marcus truly look at me for the first time in years, seeing him realize that he had been treating a millionaire like she was worthless, that he had been so busy being successful that he had forgotten where success actually came from. As I watched him stare at those cards, I knew that everything between us was about to change forever. "Mom," Marcus said, and his voice was different now, softer, more careful, like he was talking to someone who mattered instead of someone he was doing a favor for. "Why didn't you ever tell me about these?" It was a fair question, and I could see genuine confusion in his eyes mixed with something that might have been regret. But it was too late for regret, and we both knew it. The damage had been done over years of neglect, years of treating me like an obligation instead of a person, years of being too busy with his important life to remember the woman who had made it all possible. "You never asked," I said simply, and the truth of that statement hung in the air between us like smoke. "In all the years since your father died, in all the conversations about my finances and my future, and what would happen to this house when I'm gone, you never once asked if there might be something valuable here. You just assumed that because I lived simply, because I shopped at thrift stores and cut coupons and worried about the electric bill, that I had nothing of worth." I could see him flinch at my words, but they needed to be said. Sarah was looking back and forth between us like she was watching a tennis match, probably realizing that this conversation was about much more than baseball cards. Tyler cleared his throat and said, "Grandma, this is incredible. I had no idea Grandpa was such a serious collector." Emma was holding the Hank Aaron card like it might evaporate in her hands, treating it with the reverence it deserved. At least the grandchildren understood they were in the presence of something special, something that connected them to a history they had never known existed. "The appraiser asked me what I planned to do with the collection," I continued, meeting Marcus's eyes directly for the first time in the conversation. He said I could auction them piece by piece, or sell the whole collection to a private buyer, or donate them to a museum for a significant tax benefit. He also mentioned that some collectors prefer to keep valuable items like this in the family, passing them down through generations as a kind of legacy. I paused, letting the word legacy settle in the room like dust after an explosion. Marcus leaned back in his chair, and I could see him trying to process not just the financial implications, but the emotional ones. This wasn't just about money. This was about respect, about family, about the choices we make when we think nobody is watching. Mom, I'm sorry about this week. I should have taken the heat wave more seriously. I should have found a way to help you. His apology sounded genuine, but apologies are easy when there's money involved. When someone you've been ignoring turns out to have something you want. Yes, I said quietly. You should have, but you didn't. And now we both have to live with what that says about who we've become and who we choose to be going forward. As I began gathering the cards back into their protective sleeves, I could feel the weight of 38 years of motherhood shifting on my shoulders, redistributing itself into something that felt more like power and less like sacrifice. The conversation that followed lasted 3 hours, and by the end of it, we had laid out new terms for our relationship that felt more like a business negotiation than a family discussion. Marcus promised to check on me twice a week, to include me in family dinners and holiday plans, to treat me like a person whose opinions and feelings mattered. Sarah offered to help me set up online banking and learn how to use a smartphone, seemingly genuinely eager to bridge the gap that had grown between us over the years. The kids wanted to hear stories about their grandfather and learn more about the family history that had been locked away in my basement all this time. But I could see the calculation in Marcus's eyes, the way he was weighing his newfound respect for me against the potential inheritance he was now aware of. Part of me was sad that it had taken the promise of money to make him see me as valuable, but part of me was also relieved that I finally had some leverage in our relationship. For 38 years, I had given and given and given, and he had taken it all for granted. Now, at least, we were starting from a position of mutual benefit rather than one-sided sacrifice. I've decided to keep the collection for now, I told them as we prepared to end our meeting. Mr. Patterson is helping me get them properly insured and stored, and I'm going to take some time to decide what I want to do with them long-term. I could see disappointment flicker across Marcus's face. He had probably been hoping I would make some grand gesture, give him the cards as a belated reward for being my son. But those days of automatic generosity were over, at least until he proved that his newfound attention was about more than just money. As they prepared to leave, Tyler surprised me by asking if he could come back next weekend to hear more stories about his grandfather's collection. Emma wanted to know if I had any photos of Grandpa at baseball games, any memories of him that she had never heard before. Their genuine interest touched me in a way that Marcus's promises hadn't, because it felt like curiosity rather than obligation, like they actually wanted to know me as a person, rather than just manage me as a responsibility. After they left, I sat in my kitchen surrounded by the lingering smell of Sarah's perfume and the emotional residue of 38 years of family history being rewritten in a single morning. The air conditioning was humming quietly, keeping the house at a perfect 72 degrees, and I had a refrigerator full of cold water and a grandson coming to visit next weekend. But more than that, I had something I hadn't possessed in years, the knowledge that I mattered, that my life had value beyond the services I could provide to other people. The baseball cards were just pieces of cardboard with old photographs on them, but they had given me back my dignity and my power. As I carefully packed them away in a new fireproof safe that Mr. Patterson had recommended, I realized that my father had given me the greatest gift of all. Not just a financial inheritance, but the means to demand the respect I had always deserved, but never insisted upon. 3 months later, Marcus calls me every Tuesday and Friday like clockwork, and Sarah includes me in their family group chat where I get pictures of their daily life and updates about the grandchildren's activities. We have dinner together twice a month, real dinners where they ask about my opinions and listen to my stories about the old days. Tyler is writing a family history project for college, and Emma is learning to play poker because I told her that her great-grandfather taught me when I was her age. I still live in the same house, still shop carefully and cut coupons, still worry about the electric bill out of habit more than necessity. But now when the air conditioning repairman comes for routine maintenance, I don't panic about the cost. When the heat waves come, I know I have options. When my son calls, it's because he wants to talk to me, not because he feels guilty for neglecting me. The cards are still in their safe, still growing in value, still representing the bridge between who I was and who I've become. Sometimes I take them out just to hold them, to remember my father's hands turning the pages of his collector books, explaining to his little girl why Mickey Mantle was special, why some things are worth keeping even when nobody else understands their value. He taught me that the most precious things in life are often the ones we almost throw away, the ones we forget we have until we need them most. I learned that lesson twice, once from him and once from the son I raised to be strong enough to forget where his strength came from. The heat wave that nearly killed me also saved my life because it forced me to go looking for something cool in my own basement and find something priceless instead. I discovered that being invisible isn't the same as being worthless, that being forgotten isn't the same as being forgettable, and that sometimes the people we love most need to be reminded why they should love us back. If this story touched your heart, if you've ever felt overlooked by the people who should cherish you most, please leave me a comment below. Share your own story of finding your worth, of standing up for yourself, of discovering that you matter more than anyone ever told you. And if you want to hear more stories like this, stories about women who refuse to disappear, who find their power in unexpected places, who teach the world that growing older doesn't mean growing smaller, please subscribe and hit that notification bell. Your stories matter, your voice matters, and you matter. Thank you for listening to mine.